Sometimes the most profound, the most modern lessons, they come from the most ancient places. Today, we're going to dig into a text that's about 2,600 years old, the Book of Lamentations. And believe it or not, we're going to uncover an incredibly powerful lesson about empathy and grief, all through the fantastic analysis of scholar Dr. Leslie Allen. All right, so let's get right into it. When you look at the Book of Lamentations, it seems to have a pretty clear flow, a progression. But then you hit chapter 4 and it just stops you in your tracks. It doesn't seem to fit. It really breaks the flow and creates this kind of biblical puzzle. So get this, the chapter right before it, chapter 3, it's this powerful call to pray, to look for hope. And the chapter right after it, chapter 5, is that prayer. It's the community actually praying. So what on earth is chapter 4 doing? Sandwiched right in between, dragging everybody back to relive the raw, horrifying details of what they just went through. Well, the answer, according to Dr. Allen, isn't some ancient editing mistake. Oh no. It is a profoundly empathetic insight into the very nature of grief itself, and the fact that grief works on its own schedule. It's actually really simple when you think about it. The people just weren't ready. The mentor figure in this text, the one who's been guiding them, has this moment of realization. He sees that he can't just tell them to pray and get over it. Nope, they needed someone to go back with them, to sit in the rubble of their pain, because you just can't rush grief. It has its own timetable. And this act of just waiting with someone, it echoes some of the most profound moments of shared suffering we know of. Dr. Allen points to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, asking his friends not for answers, not for a solution, but just for their presence. And that's the whole point, isn't it? Real empathy isn't about pushing for progress. It's about being present in the pain. So the mentor goes back. He joins the people in this heart-wrenching funeral lament, and he gives voice to their trauma. And how does he do it? By laying out this series of shocking reversals that just show how completely their world had been turned upside down. First, he talks about the people themselves. I mean, they used to see themselves as precious, as valuable as pure gold. But now, the trauma has so completely shattered their self-worth that they feel as useless and disposable as a broken clay pot. It's this deep, crushing sense of worthlessness. Then you have this terrifying freefall. The wealthy, the ones who once feasted on delicacies and wore expensive purple clothes, are now completely destitute. They're literally clinging to piles of ash, dressed in rags. Their entire social standing just vanished overnight. And it wasn't just social status. Even the leaders of the society, who were once these glowing symbols of health and life, were physically transformed by starvation. Their skin became dark and shriveled. It was so bad they were completely unrecognizable in the streets. And this one just brilliantly captures the absolute depth of the horror. The text specifically calls the mothers compassionate, which creates this unbearable tension. Why? Because they were forced to boil their own dead children for food, just to save the rest of their family. An act of compassion becomes this unimaginable atrocity. This is the kind of reality they needed the space to grieve. But the crisis went so much deeper than just physical suffering or social collapse. This was a theological catastrophe. It was a complete shattering of their most basic, fundamental beliefs about God, the world, and their place in it. The first belief to just crumble to dust was what scholars call Zion theology. This was the absolute rock-solid certainty that Jerusalem was God's city, and because of that, it was untouchable. No one, not even foreign kings, thought it could ever fall, and yet it did. The second core belief to collapse was royal theology. This was the divine promise that a king from David's line would always be on the throne, which guaranteed God's protection forever. But when their king, Zedekiah, was captured, blinded, and dragged off to exile, that eternal promise was just broken. Losing their king was an absolutely devastating blow. Dr. Allen points out that the feeling of just complete, dashed hopes in the text sounds incredibly similar to the despair of the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the crucifixion. Remember when they said of Jesus, "But we had hoped." It's the sound of a future being completely erased. So, after 20 verses of this relentless darkness of just sitting in the ashes and staring into the void, something shifts. The chapter takes this sudden, almost defiant turn, and it offers this powerful, totally unexpected flicker of faith. The mentor suddenly pivots. He shifts the focus away from their own suffering and puts it squarely on their enemy, Edom, who had been gloating over their destruction. And he makes a promise. It's like he's saying, you might be laughing now, but trust me, you will not have the last laugh. Now, this is where Dr. Allen comes up with this brilliant term for what's happening. He calls it traffic light theology, and I just love this. The logic is so simple. Think about it. When you're stopped at an intersection and you see the light for the cross traffic turn red, what do you know? You know your light is about to turn green. So the coming red light for their enemy signals a future green light for them. And that right there, that's the crucial point. This counter-reversal, this idea that bad news for the enemy is actually good news for Zion, it provides just enough of a flicker of hope. It's the tiny spark that finally makes it possible for the community to take that next step and, in the next chapter, to finally pray. What's really cool is that the very structure of the book itself seems to reinforce this gentle movement towards a conclusion. You can see the poems get shorter and shorter. They start at around 67 lines, then drop to 44 in this chapter, and end with just 22 in the final one. It's like a literary slowdown, a way of signaling that an end, and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning is coming. So, in the end, this ancient chapter gives us this absolutely timeless lesson. And this is why this matters. It suggests that real empathy isn't about rushing to find a solution or slapping on a cheap bandage. It's about having the patience and the courage to just sit with someone in the darkness for as long as it takes until they themselves are finally ready to see the light.